Hey guys, it's Lizzie. So this is 13 signs you're only pro-fetus, but not pro-life. A logically fallacious argument that a lot of liberals will say against pro-life people who are against abortion is, but you don't support healthcare, you're pro-capital punishment, you're not really pro-life. This is called an ad hominem logical fallacy, but it is a real issue that a lot of people who are vehemently against abortion are not pro-life in so many other circumstances. This same group of people often uses the phrase family values, which often doesn't match up with the conservative agenda. But what I love about Catholicism and that I've respected about it for years is that the Catholic Church teaches a consistent pro-life ethic. So this t-shirt is beautiful. Your grace is more. One of my subscribers, Joe, runs this company. It's called PAL Campaign. PAL Campaign has the best aesthetics and they sell t-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies, hats. I was actually just talking to Joe on the phone 5 minutes ago and I was going over this video script and he's like, womb to tomb. Joe gave me a special code for all my subscribers so you can use Lizzie during checkout and get 15% off anything from the company. We're also doing a giveaway on my Instagram. 13 signs you're only pro-fetus and not fully pro-life. Number 1, you have never thought about adopting a child and even support government policies that are so concerned with tax cuts that they cut major funding to orphans and the foster care system. My dad was born to a single mom who died when he was 3, and so he grew up in the foster care system, and as a young child, he was put in extremely abusive situations. I literally cry when I think in depth about his childhood. It's common knowledge that social workers are not paid enough and that there are not enough social workers hired, so they're put in charge of so many kids that they're not able to properly monitor the living conditions of a foster home. But also, if we're going to call ourselves pro-life, why are we even having this problem in a Christian nation where there are so many kids that are not being adopted? Throughout the Old Testament, justice is constantly defined as taking care of the widows and orphans. In Amos 5, God says that he literally hates the worship of his people when they don't take care of people in these situations. And it's so common to hear Republicans say that it's not the government's job to take care of orphans and children living in poverty, but then never in their personal life consider adopting a child. Number 2, you hate the idea of paid maternity leave and paid paternity leave. This one literally makes no sense to me. If we want people to be open to life and open to having children and even open to not using birth control, then number 1 priority should be getting paid maternity leave, making it possible for moms in this situation to take off work and survive financially. Even if someone is not a single mom, it can be really hard financially when both parents are not working. But not even passing a law mandating that companies should give the mom 6 months, a month off of work to breastfeed her newborn? That is cruel. There are European countries that have paid maternity and paternity leave for over a year. If you look at the demographics of who's getting abortions, it's often single moms who already have several children. And it is mostly single moms who are at or below the poverty line. Isn't it obvious that a lot of these women who are getting abortions may just be concerned about how they are going to financially take care of the children they already have if their company refuses to give them paid maternity leave? Here's a quote by Pope John Paul II. In firmly rejecting pro-choice, it is necessary to become courageously pro-women, promoting a choice that is truly in favor of women. It is precisely the woman, in fact, who pays the highest price, not only for her motherhood, but even more for its destruction, for the suppression of the life of the child who has been conceived. The only honest stance in these situations is that of radical solidarity with the woman, which could base level include paid maternity leave. Number 3, you support capital punishment. Such mental gymnastics. If you didn't know the political climate of the US at all, but you were finding out that this group of people who call themselves pro-life super love the death penalty, it's laughable. Here's another quote by Pope John Paul II. The new evangelization calls for followers of Christ who are unconditionally pro-life, who will proclaim, celebrate, and serve the gospel of life in every situation. A sign of hope is the increasing recognition that the dignity of human life must never be taken away, even in the case of someone who has done great evil. I renew the appeal I made for a consensus to end the death penalty, which is both cruel and unusual. I really encourage you to look into an organization called the INNOCENCE Project. I've actually heard their CEO speak. It's a non-profit of attorneys and it is insane. They've gotten hundreds of people off of death row who were falsely accused of a crime, but then with new DNA evidence, they can prove that they didn't even do the crime. It also makes me so uncomfortable that a much bigger percentage of the total population of Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans are killed on death row as compared to whites. And I totally get it. When I was younger, when I was a teenager, I did not believe that systemic racism still existed in the US. But when I was in high school, I was on the debate team. And then in college, I took an entire class on the prison system. And dozens of hours of research I did, probably hundreds of hours on the debate team, reading into all these government studies, information about the criminal justice system. It is beyond obvious that there's systemic racism there. I have made 2 videos so far going in depth into systemic racism. I'm going to link them up here in the cards and in the description. Number 4, you hate Obamacare and any policy that gives more healthcare to people because you subliminally believe that only people of certain economic classes deserve healthcare. Going back to my family, the reason my dad was an orphan at the age of 3 is because his mom was living in extreme poverty because her parents had been living in extreme poverty, and she actually died from a ruptured ovarian cyst, which is completely preventable. And if she had access to healthcare, she wouldn't have died, and my dad would have known and been raised by his mom. Obviously, there were problems with Obamacare, and both Republicans and Democrats were aware of that and wanting to change it. The issue is that the Republicans did not have an alternate plan in place when they were trying to get rid of Obamacare. And that's my issue. It seems like some Republicans just do not want everyone to have more access to healthcare. And this is really personal to me as well, because I would have no health insurance and it would be impossible for me to get health insurance without Obamacare because he got rid of pre-existing conditions. Bipolar disorder is a pre-existing condition. Both of my parents also have pre-existing conditions. My dad gets blood clots, just really basic medical issues. Before Obamacare, you could be denied insurance. I received thousands of messages from people who have mental illnesses, and so many people tell me they cannot afford treatment. Bipolar disorder can kill you. There's a 1 in 4 rate of suicide. You can also kill yourself when you're manic accidentally. I calculated it and it would be several $1,000s a month without health insurance to pay for medicine and a psychiatrist. According to UC Davis, 43.1 million Americans live below the poverty line, and without health insurance and programs like Medicaid and Medicare, people will literally die because they can't afford treatment. What really annoys me though about everyone who's scared of universal health care and thinks it is just socialism is that it would be so much cheaper for everyone if everyone had access to healthcare, because legally hospitals cannot turn people away from the ER. It's so much cheaper to do preventive treatment than to wait for a problem to escalate to the extent that we're doing ER treatment. Everyone in the country will save money. transition to a more inclusive healthcare. And again, Obamacare had so many issues. I am not denying that. But literally in Congress, Republican politicians were trying to get rid of all of Obamacare without creating an alternate plan. And same with the courts. They're trying to overturn parts of Obamacare. Number 5, you hate government programs like food stamps and Medicare that help children living in extreme poverty be able to eat and get healthcare. And again, a lot of Republicans, a lot of Christians say it is not the government's job to take care of these people. But there are 43.1 million Americans living below the poverty line. And my question is, how are you expecting 30,000 different denominations of Christianity to all band together and systematically give food and healthcare to 43.1 million people? Do you really believe realistically that it'd be easy to reach all of these people? It just works so much better when they can fill out a government form and everyone can send it to the same place. And there will always be homeless people and people who fall through the cracks who Christians can continue to help. There is so much need, so much poverty going on in the country. And it's not at all like Christians cannot do anything personally to help people living in poverty. And again, a majority of the women who are choosing abortion are living in poverty and already have several children. So I think it is really important to have these government programs that systematically help so many single moms to be able to feed the children that they have because they chose life. Number 6, you don't give money to homeless people who say they are hungry. And you also don't personally donate to nonprofits who help homeless people. What I was just saying, where a lot of Christians will say it's not the government's job to help poor people, but then these same people literally refuse to give money to homeless people who are poor. That makes no sense. If we got rid of food stamps and Medicaid, I am totally confident that a majority of Christians would not become super generous and start giving money to these people. A lot of Christians will not even give money to a homeless person right in front of them who is telling them they're poor and need money. I made an entire video discussing if Christians should give money to homeless people. I'm gonna link it in the cards and down in the description. It included dozens of Bible verses about helping the poor. The most telling one is Luke 6:30, where Jesus says, "Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back." Number 7. You still think favorably on George W. Bush and the Iraq War. Even President Trump came out and said this was a horrible war. So many people have psychoanalyzed why this even happens because the whole weapons of mass destruction thing. Really early on, it was found out that he was lying about that, but estimates of how many people died in the Iraq War, it's between 150,000 to 460,000. Other organizations say 650,000 to 1.2 million. Because of the nature of the war, it was really difficult to track how many people died, but the bigger problem is that this horrible decision to start the Iraq War, which Obama then inherited, it caused the perfect political atmosphere for ISIS to form. I'm linking this really great graphic that explains the amount of people who died going into the Iraq War, the aftermath, and then all the evil and killings that ISIS has done. Number 9, when voting for a president, one of your top priorities is being really strong on military. Just you love the fact that the US is super imperialistic with our military. The US military budget is extreme. If you count the second country with the highest military all the way down to the 10th, if you combine all of their military budgets, the US military budget is more than that. How is that possible? It really annoys me how we prioritize being extremely oppressive and imperialistic in other countries, spending so much money on trying to fix other countries, which often leads to making the problem even worse, instead of putting that money into education. I feel like it's kind of a fake masculinity thing, where especially men really like having such a strong military. It feels masculine, it feels strong. But Jesus redefines strength, where he says to turn the other cheek. True strength for Jesus was letting people crucify him, was dying on the cross. Absolutely, St. Augustine talked all about the just war theory, and the Catholic Church is not saying we should never have wars. But it just seems so blatant that the US military gets involved in way too much military intervention that throughout US history has led to the unnecessary death of millions of people. Number 10, you somehow still are supporting Trump's policy of separating illegal immigrant parents from their children. How is that family values? Now, as a Catholic, my impression of this whole situation is that a majority of Christians hate that this is happening and do not agree with it. It's really interesting because at Catholic Mass, we pray for our government officials every single Mass, but it's very general. We don't pray about specific problems. But within the past 2 months, I've traveled so much, almost every week I'm in a different state. Every single Mass has specifically prayed for the parents to not be separated from the children. I've only been attending Mass for 1.5 years, but this is the first time where it seems like all church leadership is against this happening, and I hope all Catholics are against it as well. A lot of people are saying Obama did the same thing. Again, this is an ad hominem argument. Obama did it in really low rates occasionally, like if someone was literally a drug dealer and had such a high rate of drugs on them. But when Obama was president, they actually had a conversation with the entire cabinet. Someone who was there was saying that for 5 minutes they discussed whether or not they should separate the parents from children and decided that should rarely ever happen. Number 11, your rhetoric and attitude towards the LGBTQ+ community causes these groups of people to feel like God and the church hate them. Teens, part of this community, have such a high suicide rate. For people who are trans, they have a 40% suicide rate, and I constantly get messages from teens or adults who grew up in Christian homes who are gay, bi, or trans, alienated by their Christian communities, and they feel scared to come to church. Even Catholics I get messages from who believe God hates them. I wanted to read a suicide note by this teenager named Leila Alcorn, who was trans and committed suicide a few years ago. She grew up in the Protestant church I used to be a part of, Church of Christ. And the way we talked about these issues, it honestly didn't surprise me that someone would commit suicide because of the way her parents reacted. When I was 14, I learned what transgender meant and cried of happiness. After 10 years of confusion, I finally understood who I was. I immediately told my mom, and she reacted extremely negatively, telling me that it was a phase, that I would never truly be a girl, that God doesn't make mistakes, that I am wrong. If you are reading this, parents, please don't tell this to your kids. Even if you are a Christian or are against transgender people, don't ever say that to someone, especially your kid. That won't do anything but make them hate themselves. That's exactly what it did to me. I'm not at all saying that Christians should be pro-gay marriage or that Christians should agree that people with gender dysphoria should transition. But I've literally heard the way a lot of Christians, the way a lot of Catholics talk about these issues, and I'm not at all being super sensitive about the way people talk, but it's just objectively horrible and invalidating what a lot of people say. Regarding people who are trans, I made an entire video interviewing a trans Christian, but gender dysphoria is a real medical condition diagnosed by a therapist or a psychiatrist, where people feel extreme fear, discomfort, hate towards their anatomy of the biological gender that they were born with. And so just tossing this aside and acting like it's not real, God made you this way. No, people literally have this objective thing happening in their brain where they have gender dysphoria, and so we need to help these people and take care of them. The reason I'm so intense and passionate about this issue is because I receive so many messages from my subscribers who are gay, who have been suicidal. Almost every single message I get from someone who is gay, they talk about how they were suicidal. And so I just do not think it's pro-life if you're saying things, thinking things, believing things that are causing people to want to kill themselves. Number 12, you don't care about global poverty and the fact that 18 million children die every year because of extreme poverty. You think that donating to NGOs who are helping out these people, you talk about it as as a drop in the bucket, an issue that we're never going to be able to totally fix. So donating money that could save several lives, prevent someone from dying, you would rather spend that money on living a more materialistic lifestyle. Taking care of the poor is one of the issues talked about the most throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jesus is constantly ministering to people who are poor. And again, Christians are always saying, it's not the government's job to help people who are poor. But then these same people do not believe that we should be donating to organizations that help people who are living in global poverty. It's a complete contradiction. One of the things that I absolutely love about the Catholic Church, that I respected years and years before I ever became Catholic, is that the Catholic Church's stance on poverty is so bold and extreme. It talks about constantly how we need to take care of the poor. That's something that papacy is always pushing, and a lot of the money donated at Mass is given to help the poor. So in Catholicism, that's a constant focus, but in other churches I've been a part of, it's not been mentioned that much. Number 13, you do not believe that mental illness is real and believe that people should just pray it away, that it's a spiritual problem, maybe it's demon possession. When someone you know says they're in depression, you think they're just making it up or exaggerating, and have even told that to people. I kind of discussed this before in providing healthcare to more people, how Obamacare was integral in making mental health the same price as healthcare for other issues, and making it illegal to unjustly discriminate, to allow people with pre-existing conditions like bipolar to still be able to have health insurance. Treating people with mental illness, it's not just about the government making it cheaper to access healthcare, but it's the way each of you talk to people in your life who have mental illnesses. Like I said, I get thousands of messages, and so many of them are from kids, teens who have depression, who are suicidal, and they tell their parents about this, and the parents do not believe it is real. And I had the same thing where I was in severe depression and suicidal even, and there were people in my life who thought I was exaggerating, making it up. I've had friends tell me to go off my meds. 1 in 2 people with bipolar will attempt to kill themselves. 1 in 4 people with bipolar will kill themselves. So mental illness is not something to brush off and not take seriously, because people really do go through with suicides. For men, it's so much worse. 4 times more men than women successfully commit suicide because they often will kill themselves with a gun rather than pill overdoses. And I also have a lot of thoughts in how the way therapy is set up, it works better with the way women think than the way men think. And I think especially our society constantly tells men to man up, that it is weakness if they're struggling with something emotionally, that it's weakness if they're struggling with a mental illness. I think men's emotions are invalidated the most. And so if you want to be completely pro-life, you need to be pro-mental health treatment. So those were 13 reasons you may be pro-fetus but not fully pro-life. Regarding political issues, government policies, I think we need to all admit that the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, both have issues and stances that directly go against Catholic dogma, that directly go against Christianity. There's not one party that's the Christian party. Both are not pro-life in some stance. Both have policies that are pro-death, but we can change that. If enough Christians who constantly vote for these Republican politicians were consistently pro-life in everything I mentioned, then we wouldn't be getting these alt-right politicians who want to get rid of all regulations, get rid of healthcare, help less people living in poverty. You know what I mean? Like the entire population of the US, if we would all individually change and become cohesively pro-life, then these extremist politicians would not continue being elected. Again, if you want to twin me and buy the same t-shirt, I'm going to link below PAL campaign and head over to my Instagram at LizziesAnswers if you want to participate in the giveaway. And use my code Lizzie for 15% off of anything on the website. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!